So in the first module of this lecture, we saw that Descartes led a remarkable and exciting life, that he was an exceptional intellect who made contributions to mathematics, physics, and philosophy. In this module, we want to turn our attention specifically to this work, Meditations on First Philosophy. And we want to specifically look at the two projects in Meditations on First Philosophy. There's a negative project and a positive project. So let's look at a quote from that first meditation from the very first paragraph. He begins the meditations with the observation: I accepted many falsehoods as true in my youth. But what I built on the foundations of these falsehoods was dubious. And therefore that once in my life I would need to tear down everything and begin anew from the foundations if I wanted to establish a firm and lasting knowledge. Now, when you think about that quotation, it seems like an extreme overreaction to the situation. So he starts off by saying, look, I believed some things in my youth that didn't turn out to be true. And from that he gets to, and so I must razz, destroy, bring to the ground my entire knowledge edifice. Everything that I held true must be destroyed. And you think to yourself, wow, that just seems way, way too harsh for the problem that you pointed to. But I think there are two things that we can look at in Descartes that help us to make sense of why he has that kind of response. On the one hand, Descartes is trying to clear some intellectual space, as we'll see, for the development of the scientific revolution, for science practiced as he understands it. On the other hand, for Descartes, knowledge is an edifice. It is a construction. It's a building. And so if you discover that you've got a faulty keystone or a faulty foundation, you can't just say, well, I'll just fix a little bit here or there, put some paint on it, etc. You have to take care of it by getting rid of everything that's on top, starting at the very beginning and building it right. And this is exactly what Descartes proposes. Descartes doesn't see his house as having a bad board here or there. He sees his house as having termites. The whole thing has to be addressed. Potentially, a belief can spread and contaminate his entire belief edifice. And so he wants to get it right from the very foundations, working his way up. So Descartes' project here in the Meditations then includes a significant epistemic component. It's not the only thing that Descartes is doing in the Meditations, but it's certainly a very important part of it. Now, epistemology is the study of the nature, the sources, and the extent of knowledge. It asks questions like, well, what is knowledge? What differentiates knowledge from a failure to know? How does one get knowledge? What if any connection or structure exists within elements inside of a body of knowledge? What can humans and others know? What can't they know? Now, the most contemporary or common theory of knowledge in contemporary philosophy is that knowledge is justified through belief. So someone believes something, that belief is true, and they have good reasons for their belief. Now, this first project that we just talked about is the negative project in the Meditations, the negative epistemic project, and it's a skeptical project. It's a project of trying to undermine all his knowledge of the external world. Now, skepticism generally is a name for any thesis that claims that someone or anyone or everyone does not have or maybe cannot have knowledge with regard to some area. So you might say we'll never really know if there was a second shooter on the grassy knoll in the Kennedy assassination, or we'll never really know if there are livable planets outside of our universe, outside of our galaxy rather, sorry. So there may be skeptical hypotheses we have about particular domains or particular topics. You'll never really know if your girlfriend cheated on you on that vacation to Mazatlan, say. Those are carefully limited skeptical hypotheses. Now, external world skepticism is a form of skepticism, but it's got no such limitations. It differs from these more modest skeptical hypotheses in that it denies all knowledge about the world. So, external world skepticism says no one can ever know anything about the world, period. This external world skeptical project is what Descartes is trying to engage in as the negative project in the first meditation. And he's using this external world skeptical project to clear the way for his second positive project, which is also an epistemic project. So the positive project is to rebuild the knowledge edifice, to construct a good knowledge edifice using sound epistemic principles. Now that we have a kind of understanding of those two projects, I want to introduce a sort of cautionary element to the discussion. We have to be careful in understanding Descartes' project, probably more careful than our translation allows. This is an old translation, and so it's not particularly rigorous and good by contemporary standards. As I mentioned, the most common contemporary theory of knowledge equates knowledge with justified true belief. And this contemporary theory of knowledge has precursors not only in Descartes' work, but stretching all the way back to the philosophy of ancient Greece. However, there's a caveat, there's a problem here. Descartes' view isn't about beliefs. Descartes' view focuses on judgments, actions, and on ideas. So for Descartes, ideas are the fundamental representational element of our mind. And his metaphorical way of understanding ideas primarily is as images. Judgments are judgments about those ideas, our actions on or about those ideas. And so Descartes understands the mind in a way that's sort of different from the way that we understand the mind today. We think of the mind in terms of our beliefs and our desires. For Descartes, the mind operates by representing the world through ideas and by making judgments about those ideas, not by believing things or desiring things. And in fact, the Latin word for belief, fides, does not figure in his characterization of the project anywhere in the Meditations. So a better understanding of Descartes' project is that it's an epistemology of judgments, judgments about ideas, and not a theory about knowledge based on belief. One other thing that we should mention. So Descartes talks about razing his entire knowledge edifice. And it makes it sound as though he can simply choose to believe something or not to believe something. And the view that you can do that you can just decide to believe or disbelieve something, is called doxastic, when it's about beliefs, in this case, judgmental voluntarism. So voluntarism says that you can voluntarily decide to do something or not do something. And Descartes has elements of this voluntaristic view in his epistemology. However, there are limits to it. So for Descartes, certainty compels assent. If you're certain about something, you can't choose not to believe it. And presumably, complete uncertainty would compel withholding assent to a judgment. And so there are conditions under which Descartes doesn't think you can will or choose to believe or disbelieve something. You're compelled to assent, or you're compelled to withhold your assent. Now, outside of those conditions, there does seem to be some degree of discretion. That is, you do seem to be able to control what you believe and not believe when the evidence doesn't compel you completely. It doesn't mean that you have ultimate free choice. You can't believe things that seem obviously false. But you do have some discretion over what you assent to. So having qualified Descartes' thesis and the way he thinks about things, we'll for the rest of these lectures, largely ignore that distinction, because it's very useful to understand the way in which contemporary epistemologists have come to understand his project. It's the epistemological interpretation of his work that motivates some philosophers to proclaim that he's the father of modern epistemology. And so generally we'll lapse into discussion about belief and about justification rather than thinking about judgments, about assent, and about ideas.